I buried my son 20 years ago, closed the casket myself, signed the papers, walked away with empty hands. Last month, at exactly 2:07 in the morning, my phone rang. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the number. His number. The same one I disconnected. In 2005, I answered, without breathing. A voice whispered, "Dad, don't hang up." For a long time after that call ended, I just sat there on the edge of my bed, the phone still pressed to my ear, even though the line had gone dead. My wife Carol stirred beside me and asked if everything was okay. I didn't answer her at first. I couldn't. My mouth was dry, my hands were shaking, and my heart was beating so hard it felt like it might crack something open inside my chest. Finally I said, "Someone just called." That was all I could manage. She asked who, and I said the only word that made sense. "Evan." Carol sat up slowly. She didn't laugh. She didn't tell me I'd been dreaming. She just stared at me, her face pale in the glow of the alarm clock. "That's not funny," she said quietly. I shook my head. "I know," I told her. "I know." She reached for the phone, looked at the call log, and then looked back at me. The number was there. Evan's old number. The one we'd memorized back when he was a teenager and thought he was invincible. Carol whispered, "Maybe it's a scam." I wanted to believe that. God. I wanted to believe that. But scammers don't whisper "Dad" like they're afraid someone else might hear. I didn't sleep after that. I sat in the kitchen until dawn, staring at the same chipped mug I'd been using for years, replaying the sound of that voice over and over in my head. It hadn't sounded young. It hadn't sounded strong. It sounded tired, like someone who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time. Around 6 in the morning, Carol came in and sat across from me. She asked, "What did he say?" I told her the truth. "Just Dad, don't hang up," then breathing. Then nothing. She covered her mouth with her hand, and for a moment I thought she might cry. Instead, she said something that surprised me. "We need to call the number back." I waited until after breakfast. I don't know why. Maybe I was afraid of what would happen if someone answered, or worse, if no one did. When I finally pressed call, it rang 3 times and went to voicemail. No greeting, just a beep. I didn't leave a message. I hung up and felt foolish immediately, like I'd missed my only chance. Around 10, the phone rang again. Same number. I answered on the first ring. "Hello?" I said. There was a pause. Then the same voice, clearer this time. "Dad, it's me." I asked where he was. I asked how this was possible. I asked everything at once. He stopped me with one sentence. "They said I was dead." I wasn't. I don't remember sitting down, but suddenly I was. He told me to listen and not interrupt. He said he didn't have much time. He said he'd tried before but got scared. I asked him why now. He said because someone else is looking for me. That made my stomach turn. I asked, "Who?" He didn't answer. Instead he said, "Do you still live on Cedar Ridge?" I told him yes. He said, "Good. Don't tell anyone. Not even Mom." Carol heard that and shook her head, tears running down her face. I said, "Your mother is sitting right here." There was silence. Then he whispered, "I'm sorry." The call dropped again. This time when I tried to call back, the number was disconnected, completely gone. Like it had never existed. Carol and I sat there, holding hands like we used to when Evan was in surgery all those years ago. She finally said, "If this is a lie, it's the cruelest one imaginable." I nodded. "And if it's not," I said, "then everything we thought we knew is wrong." We spent the rest of the day digging through old boxes. Police reports, hospital records, the death certificate. Everything said the same thing. Evan Carter, deceased, cause of death. Injuries sustained in a single vehicle crash. That night, I drove to the cemetery alone. I hadn't been there in years. I stood in front of his headstone and read his name out loud, just to make sure it was still there. I said, "If this is some kind of joke, it's not funny." No answer. Just the quiet hum of the road nearby. As I turned to leave, my phone buzzed. One text message. No number. Just words. "I'm sorry I scared you. I'll explain. Tomorrow." I sat back down on the cold stone bench and laughed, a sound that didn't feel like it came from me at all. When I got home, Carol was waiting. She didn't ask questions. She just hugged me and said, "We'll face it together." I wanted to believe her, but deep down, I knew something was coming. Something that had been buried longer than my son. Something that had finally decided to surface. And whatever it wasn't finished with us yet. I didn't sleep that night either. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Evan at 17, slouched on the couch with his phone glued to his hand, rolling his eyes when I told him to be careful driving. By morning, my head was pounding, but my mind felt sharp, alert in a way it hadn't been in years. Carol made coffee and set it in front of me, without asking if I wanted it. She said, "If this is real, we need to be smart." I nodded. "If it's not," I said, "we still need to be careful." We agreed on one thing immediately. We wouldn't tell anyone yet, not our daughter, not friends, not even our pastor. Not until Evan explained himself. Around noon, my phone buzzed again. A text. Same blank sender. "I can't come to you, too risky. You need to come alone." Carol read it over my shoulder and shook her head. "Absolutely not," she said. I typed back, "Where?" A minute passed. Then another. Finally an address appeared. An old strip mall on the south side of town, mostly abandoned after the factory closed years ago. I stared at the screen and felt something cold settle in my gut. Carol grabbed her keys. "I'm coming," she said. I shook my head. He said, "Alone." She looked at me, eyes flashing. "He's still our son." I put my hand over hers. "I know, that's why I have to go." The drive felt longer than it should have. Every red light felt personal. When I pulled into the cracked parking lot, I half expected the place to be empty. Instead, there was one car parked near the far end. An older sedan, windows tinted, engine off. I text, "I'm here." Almost immediately my phone rang. I answered. "Don't get out," Evan said. "Just listen." I told him I was listening. He said, "I'm not who you remember." I almost laughed. "Son," I said, "I don't care who you are now." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You should." He told me the night of the crash wasn't what the police said it was. He said he'd been following someone. Someone older. Someone who'd promised him quick money for a simple favor. I asked, "What kind of favor?" He said, "I didn't know at the time." He said the crash happened, but he didn't die. He said he woke up in a hospital that wasn't ours, with people asking questions he didn't understand. Then he said the word that made my throat tighten. Witness. He told me they offered him a choice. Go home and pretend nothing happened, or disappear. He said they told him we'd be safer if we believed he was dead. I asked him who they were. He laughed. A short, bitter sound. "You don't want to know," he said. I told him I deserved to. He said, "Dad, if I say it out loud, you're in it too." I looked around the empty lot, suddenly aware of how exposed I was. "Why now?" I asked again. He sighed. "Because the man I testified against is getting out." My heart dropped. "And because someone leaked my old file." He paused. "My real name is back on the table." I asked if he was nearby. He said no. I asked if he was safe. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he said, "Do you remember the watch Grandpa gave me?" I said yes. He told me to look under the seat of my car. I got out before I could stop myself and checked. There it was. Grandpa's old watch. Scratched, just the way Evan used to wear it. My knees almost gave out. I picked it up and held it like it might disappear. "That's how you know it's me," he said softly. "I couldn't speak," he said. "I can't stay on the phone." Then, "I'm sorry, Dad." The line went dead. I sat there for a long time. When I finally drove home, Carol was waiting at the door. I showed her the watch. She broke down then, really broke down, the kind of crying that comes from years of restraint snapping all at once. When she could speak, she said, "He's alive." I nodded. "He is," I said, "and he's in trouble." We spent the afternoon arguing quietly about what to do next. Carol wanted to call a lawyer. I wanted to wait. Evan had asked me to. That had to mean something. That evening there was a knock at the door. My stomach tightened. I opened it to find a man in his late 40s, clean cut, holding a badge. "Mr. Carter?" he asked. I said yes. He introduced himself as Detective Harris. He said he was following up on an old case. My old case. He asked if we'd heard from Evan recently. Carol's hand tightened on my arm. I asked, "Why?" He said, "Because his name just came up in a federal database." I asked if that meant Evan was alive. Harris looked at me carefully. "That depends," he said, "on who's asking." I told him we hadn't heard anything. He studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. "If you do," he said, "call me first." After he left, Carol whispered, "They already know." I shook my head. "They suspect." My phone buzzed again. One last message. "You did good. Don't trust the badge. I'll explain soon." I looked at Carol and said the words I'd been dreading. "This isn't over." She nodded. It never was. That night, as we lay in bed, I realized something that made my chest ache. For 20 years, I'd been mourning a son I thought I lost. Now I had one who was alive, but farther away than ever, and whatever had taken him from us back then was circling back. This time it wasn't just after Evan, it was after the truth. And somehow, whether I wanted it or not, I was part of it now. I woke up before dawn, with the same thought looping in my head. Evan had told the truth, or he was risking everything to sell the most elaborate lie imaginable. There was no middle ground anymore. Carol was already awake, staring at the ceiling. She said my name before I spoke hers. "We can't pretend nothing's happening," she said. I nodded. "And we can't chase him blindly either." We sat there in the half-light, weighing fear against hope, until the sound of a car slowing outside made us both freeze. It passed, but the tension stayed. By mid-morning, I decided to do the one thing Evan hadn't told me not to do. I went back to the old files. Not the ones from the police department, but my own bank statements from 20 years ago. Insurance correspondence. A thin envelope marked confidential that I'd never opened because I didn't have the strength back then. Inside was a letter from a federal office I didn't recognize, thanking us for our cooperation and confirming that all necessary arrangements had been completed. There was a signature, but no phone number. No explanation, just a sentence that made my hands tremble. "This action is taken in the interest of national security." Carol read it twice, then whispered, "They knew," I said. "Someone did." That was when my phone rang again. Same blank sender. This time it was a call. Evan didn't waste time. "You found it, didn't you?" he said. I asked how he knew. He said, "Because that letter was supposed to be destroyed." I felt a surge of anger I hadn't let myself feel in years. "You let us believe you were dead," I said. "You let your mother grieve." He didn't argue. "I know," he said quietly. "And I'll never forgive myself for that." He told me the arrangement had an expiration date, 20 years. That was the deal. New identity, no contact, no records. After that, the protection ended. I asked why the call came now, not later. He said, "Because someone wants to clean up loose ends." I asked if that someone was the man he testified against. He said no. It's someone higher. He told me there were files that never made it into evidence. Names. Payments. He said one of those names belonged to someone still powerful, They don't want me talking, he said. And they don't want you asking questions. I asked him what he wanted from me. He hesitated. I need you to trust someone, he said. I immediately thought of Detective Harris and felt my jaw tighten. Evan said, not him. He gave me a name I didn't recognize and told me where to find her. A woman who used to work inside the system. She owes me, he said, and she's the only reason I'm still breathing. Before I could ask more, he added, Dad, if anything happens to me, you have to give her everything. The call ended before I could respond. Carol listened as I repeated every word. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she said, We're already in this. She was right. The knock came that afternoon, softer than the detectives had been. A woman stood on our porch, late 50s, sharp eyes, no badge. She introduced herself using the same name Evan had given me. I was hoping you'd call, she said. But this works too. Carol stiffened beside me. I asked how she knew where we lived. She smiled thinly. Your son told me where you'd be, if he ever failed. We sat at the kitchen table again, like the night Evan died. She didn't waste time. She told us Evan had been a witness in something much larger than a single crime, something that crossed state lines, agencies, and decades. She said the crash that night had been real, but the response afterward had been controlled. Your son saw something. He wasn't supposed to, she said. And he survived. I asked why we hadn't been told. She leaned forward. Because parents ask questions, she said. And questions get people killed. Carol asked the question I'd been avoiding. Is Evan in danger right now? The woman didn't answer immediately. Then she said, yes. She explained that Evan had reached out to her because his cover had been compromised. Someone had accessed sealed files. Someone with authority. That's why you got the call, she said. He needed to anchor himself to something real. She looked at me. To you, my chest tightened. All this time, Evan hadn't called for help. He'd called for home. The woman told us we had two choices. Walk away and hope the protection held, or help Evan bring everything into the open. I asked what helping meant. She said, risk. She told us there were documents stored in a place only Evan knew, tied to our name for a reason. He trusted you with the key, she said. I remembered the watch, the weight of it in my hand. I asked where, she said, you'll know. That answer frustrated me, but something in her tone told me she wasn't lying. That night Carol and I sat in the garage staring at the old tool chest Evan used to tinker with as a kid. I opened the false bottom we'd forgotten existed, and found a sealed envelope in a small flash drive. Carol covered her mouth. I picked them up and felt the gravity of 20 years settle in. My phone buzzed one more time. A text from Evan, that's it, I'm proud of you. I typed back, come home. There was no reply. As we locked the garage, headlights swept briefly across the driveway and disappeared. Carol squeezed my hand. They're watching, she said. I nodded. For the first time since Evan's call, I wasn't just afraid. I was determined. Whatever had stolen my son's life once wasn't going to do it again without a fight. And somewhere out there, Evan was waiting for us to catch up. I didn't open the envelope right away. I don't know if that was fear or instinct. But something told me once I did, there would be no going back. Carol felt it too. We sat at the kitchen table with it between us, the flash drive beside it like evidence already judging us. Finally, she said, we've lived with not knowing for 20 years. I nodded and slid my finger under the seal. Inside were copies of documents, older than they looked, stamped and re-stamped, names blacked out, dates circled in red ink. At the top of the first page was Evan's old signature. My stomach tightened. He'd been preparing for this longer than I realized. The papers weren't written in plain language, but I didn't need a translator to understand the pattern. Payments routed through shell accounts. Transport logs that didn't match official records. Incident reports quietly amended days later. Carol pointed to a date and whispered, that's the week of the crash. I followed her finger and felt my throat close. Evan hadn't just witnessed something. He'd been part of a chain of events someone had gone to great lengths to erase. At the bottom of one page was a note in Evan's handwriting. If this reaches you, it means the promise was broken. We plugged the flash drive into my old laptop. It took a moment to load, and in that moment I thought of all the times Evan had sat at that same table, tapping away at a screen, impatient with my questions. The files were labeled carefully. Audio, video, video. Statements. Carol clicked on the first audio file. Evan's voice filled the room, younger, steadier, explaining what he'd seen, who had been there, and why he'd followed that car the night everything went wrong. Hearing him like that, alive in a time we thought was gone forever, nearly broke me. Halfway through the second file, the power flickered. The screen went black. Carol grabbed my arm. "Did you see that?" she asked. I nodded. The house was quiet. Too quiet. When the lights came back on, the laptop restarted, but the flash drive was gone from the screen. I pulled it out and tried again. Nothing. "They did that on purpose," Carol said. I wanted to argue, to tell her it was coincidence, but deep down I knew better. Evan had warned us. Someone was watching. My phone rang. Detective Harris. I stared at it until it stopped. A second later, a text from an unknown number appeared. "We need to talk. Now." Carol shook her head. "Don't answer," she said. Before I could respond, there was a knock at the door. Not soft this time. Firm. Official. I opened it to find Harris standing there again. But he wasn't alone. Another man stood behind him, younger, expressionless. Harris smiled, like we were old friends. "We're concerned about you," he said. "Mind if we come in?" I stepped aside because refusing felt like inviting trouble. Harris's eyes moved around the living room, lingering on the closed laptop. "Long day?" he asked. I said yes. He nodded. "It's been a long month for a lot of people." Carol asked what he wanted. Harris leaned against the counter casually. "We're following up on some irregularities," he said. "And your son's name keeps popping up." He watched our faces closely as he said it. "That happens sometimes with old records." I didn't answer, he continued. "If Evan reached out to you, we need to know." I thought of Evan's message. "Don't trust the badge," I said. "We told you before, we haven't heard from him." Harris smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I hope that's true," he said. "Because if someone was impersonating your son, that would be cruel." He paused. "And dangerous." The younger man finally spoke. "If you remember anything," he said, "call us." They left without another word, but the air felt heavier after the door closed. That night, Carol and I didn't turn on the lights. We sat in the dark, whispering like we were hiding from something that could hear us breathe. I asked her if she regretted opening the envelope. She said, "No." Then she surprised me. "I regret believing them." The power flickered again, just for a second. My phone buzzed. A message from Evan. "They came, didn't they?" I typed back yes. He replied, "I'm sorry. That means the clock's moving faster." He called a few minutes later. Voice strained. "You need to get those files somewhere safe," he said. I told him the flash drive wasn't working. He cursed softly. "They're blocking access remotely," he said. "But they can't erase what's printed." I told him about Harris. Evan went quiet. Then he said, "He's not who he says he is." I asked, "Who Harris really worked for?" Evan said, "The people who ended the deal." He told me there was one more copy of everything, hidden where no one would look twice. "You're going to have to move," he said. Tonight, Carol didn't hesitate when I told her. She packed quickly, grabbing only what mattered. As we loaded the car, I noticed a sedan idling down the street, its headlights turned off. As we pulled out, my phone buzzed again. "Evan." "Don't drive straight there," he said. "They'll follow." My heart pounded. For 20 years we'd lived quietly, obediently, believing grief was the worst thing that could happen to us. We were wrong. The worst thing was learning the truth and realizing how many people would do anything to keep it buried. As we drove into the night, I understood something that hadn't been clear before. Evan hadn't just called to say he was alive. He'd called to hand us a choice: hide again or finish what he started. And as the road stretched ahead, dark and uncertain, I knew which one we were going to take. We didn't drive far at first. Evan had warned me not to, and I trusted his instincts more than my own now. I took back roads, turned when it didn't make sense, doubled back once, just to be sure. The sedan stayed with us for 10 minutes, maybe 15, then disappeared. Carol watched the mirrors without blinking. "They're testing us," she said. I nodded. "Or waiting." We stopped at an old 24-hour diner on the edge of town, the kind that still smelled like burnt coffee and didn't ask questions. Evan texted a single word: "Good." Inside the diner, I spread the papers across the table between our plates. Carol kept her coat on. I didn't open the flash drive again. Instead, I read the margins, Evan's notes, his handwriting slanting slightly to the right like it always had. There were names partially redacted, but patterns were clear. Money moving in circles. Crashes reclassified. Witnesses disappearing. Carol pointed to one line. "This one," she said. "That's Harris, isn't it?" The initials matched. My stomach sank. Evan hadn't just been hiding from criminals. He'd been hiding from the people who were supposed to protect him. My phone buzzed. Evan again. He didn't call this time. "You need to meet her," the message read. "She's the only one who knows where the last copy is." I asked where. He sent an address, 2 hours north, near the state line. Carol read it and exhaled slowly. "That's practically nowhere," she said. "Exactly," I replied. Evan followed with another message. "If I don't check in by sunrise, don't wait." My fingers hovered over the screen. I typed, "Come with us." The reply came quickly. "I can't." Not yet. We finished our coffee in silence and left cash on the table. The drive north was quiet, broken only by Evan's occasional updates. We passed through small towns where nothing seemed to change, where people still trusted the familiar. Carol finally said we could still turn back. I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "I spent 20 years thinking my son was dead. I'm not turning back now." She reached for my hand and squeezed it. That was enough. We reached the address just after midnight. An old farmhouse. Lights off, no cars in sight. I hesitated, then knocked. After a long pause, the door opened a crack. The same woman from our kitchen looked out. She studied us for a moment, then stepped aside. "You shouldn't have come together," she said. Carol replied, "We don't do anything separately anymore." The woman didn't argue. She locked the door behind us and led us inside. She wasted no time. "They're closing in," she said. "The deal that protected your son expired, but that wasn't enough for them." She explained that Evan's testimony had implicated someone who never faced consequences. Someone who'd built an entire career on keeping things quiet. "Those files you have," she said, "are proof of a pattern." I asked. "About the last copy." She nodded toward a safe bolted into the floor. "It's here, but once it's out, there's no hiding again." Carol asked what that meant. The woman looked at her steadily. "It means everything breaks." She opened the safe and pulled out a thick folder and a second flash drive. "This one isn't connected," she said. "No remote access." I felt a rush of relief I hadn't realized I was holding back. She continued, "If this goes public, people will ask why Evan disappeared." I said, "We'll answer." She shook her head. "No," she said, "you'll survive." She explained that once the story broke, Evan would need to stay hidden a little longer, but not forever, she added. That was the first hopeful thing I'd heard in days. My phone rang. "Evan." His voice was tight. "They found me," he said. My heart dropped. I asked where. He said, "Doesn't matter." I need you to listen. He told me he'd planted a trail, enough to keep them busy for a few hours. I need you to trust her, he said, referring to the woman. She knows what to do. I told him to stay safe. He laughed softly. That ship sailed a long time ago, Dad. The call cut off. The woman didn't hesitate. She grabbed her keys and said, "We're moving." Carol asked where. "Somewhere loud," she replied. "They don't like noise." We loaded the files into a bag and followed her out into the night. As we drove, she explained the plan. Leak the documents through channels that couldn't be silenced all at once. Force attention. Force accountability. Once it's out, she said, they can't put it back. I asked. About Evan. She glanced at me in the mirror. Your son is smarter than they are, she said. He's been surviving them for 20 years. We reached a larger town just as dawn began to creep in. She parked near a busy truck stop and handed me a burner phone. If he calls, answer, she said. No matter what. Carol leaned against me. Exhaustion finally catching up. I felt it too, but beneath it was something else. Purpose. For the first time since Evan died, I wasn't reacting to grief. I was acting for my son. As the sky lightened, my phone buzzed. A text from Evan. Still here. I closed my eyes and let out a breath I'd been holding for days. The woman nodded. Good, she said. Then we keep going. I looked at Carol and saw the same determination reflected back at me. Whatever happened next, we weren't alone anymore, and neither was Evan. By the time the sun was fully up, the world around us looked deceptively normal. Trucks rolled in and out. People laughed over greasy breakfasts, and no one seemed to notice that our lives were balanced on a thin wire. The woman, whose name I still didn't fully trust to speak aloud, sat across from us with a legal pad, writing and rewriting the same list. Timing is everything, she said. If we move too fast, they bury it. Too slow, and they bury us. Carol watched her, eyes sharp despite the exhaustion. You talk like you've done this before, she said. The woman didn't deny it. I have, she replied. And I paid for it. She explained the next step in plain terms. The documents would be released in stages, not all at once. Enough to raise questions, not enough to reveal the full picture. We let the story breathe, she said. We let people start asking why, I asked. Who people were. She smiled faintly. Journalists who don't owe favors, she said. Oversight committees who like being seen. Carol frowned. And what happens when they push back? The woman closed the pad. They will, she said. That's when the rest comes out. My phone rang again and my heart jumped before I even saw the number. Evan. His voice sounded steadier this time, but tired. I had to move twice, he said. They're clumsy when they panic, I asked. If he was hurt. No, he said. Just running on fumes. I told him we had the files. All of them. There was a pause, then a sound that might have been relief. Good, he said. Then it was worth it. I told him to come to us. He said, Not yet. I need to finish something. The woman leaned closer to hear his voice. Evan didn't acknowledge her directly, but he spoke as if he knew she was there. You remember the ledger? He asked. She nodded. I do, she said aloud. Evan said, It's time. She exhaled slowly. That will get their attention, she said. Evan replied, That's the point. Before hanging up, he said something that stuck with me. Dad, no matter how this ends, thank you for believing me. The line went dead, but his words stayed. We moved again, this time to a small rented office space. The woman had arranged under a different name. It wasn't much, but it had reliable internet and no obvious connections to us. She began making calls, careful, coded conversations that told me she'd been planning this long before Evan reached out again. Carol sat beside me, sorting documents, her hands steady. I watched her and felt a surge of gratitude. She'd lost a son too, but she'd never stopped being his mother. By early afternoon, the first release went out. Nothing dramatic. A single document, stripped of names but heavy with implication. A journalist confirmed receipt. Another asked for more. The woman nodded. "Good," she said. "They're biting." My phone buzzed with a news alert an hour later. A short article questioning inconsistencies in an old federal case. No mention of Evan, yet, but it was enough to stir the water. Carol squeezed my arm. "It's happening," she whispered. That was when the pressure came back. My phone rang from a blocked number. I didn't answer. A minute later, Carol's phone rang. Then the office phone. The woman silenced them all. "Let them stew," she said. "Silence makes people nervous." She was right. An email arrived instead. Thinly veiled threats, dressed up as concern. "Stand down," it said. "You're putting yourselves at risk." I laughed. A short, humorless sound. "Little late for that," I said. Evan checked in again as evening approached. His voice was strained. "They're offering deals," he said. "Immunity. Money." I asked if he'd consider it. "No," he said, without hesitation. "Not after Mom." I swallowed hard. Carol leaned in close to the phone. "We're proud of you," she said. Evan was quiet for a moment. "I know," he replied. "That's why I can do this." As the second release went out, this time with more detail, the tone shifted. The woman's phone lit up with messages. Journalists asking for confirmation. Others warning her off. She handled it all calmly, like someone who'd learned the cost of panic. I felt useless sitting there. But she shook her head when I offered to help. "Your job," she said, "is to stay alive." That landed heavier than I expected. Late that night, Detective Harris's name appeared on my phone again. "This time," I answered. "You're making a mistake," he said without preamble. "This won't end the way you think." I told him it already had. He laughed. "You think your son survives this?" he asked. My grip tightened. "He already has," I said. There was a pause, then a click. The line went dead. Carol looked at me and nodded once. No words needed. Near midnight, Evan sent a final message for the day. "They know it's me now." I typed back. "Where are you?" He replied. "Somewhere I shouldn't be." Then after a pause, "If I go quiet, keep going." My chest ached. But I didn't argue. I understood now. This wasn't just about bringing him home. It was about finishing something he'd been forced to start alone. As we shut down the office for the night, the woman looked at us both. "Tomorrow will be worse," she said, "but it will also be clearer." I lay awake later, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the boy I'd lost, and the man he'd become. 20 years ago, I thought the worst thing that could happen was burying my son. I was wrong. The worst thing was almost losing him twice, and I wasn't going to let that happen. The next morning didn't start with a phone call or a knock at the door. That almost made it worse. Silence had become the warning sign. Carol noticed it too. She said, "They're deciding what to do." The woman was already awake, scrolling through messages on her phone, her expression unreadable. "They've stopped threatening," she said. Finally, "That means they're shifting tactics." I asked what that usually meant. She replied, "They'll try to discredit us, or isolate us." She looked directly at me, "Or scare you into talking." It didn't take long. Around mid-morning, a news alert popped up on my phone. A brief piece questioning the credibility of an unnamed source connected to the old case. It hinted at mental health issues, grief, delusion. I felt my face flush. Carol read it over my shoulder and slammed her hand on the table. "They're calling you crazy," she said. The woman nodded. "Predictable," she said. "They always go after the family first." I wanted to respond publicly, to shout the truth at anyone who would listen, but she stopped me. "Not yet," she said. "Let them underestimate you." Evan didn't check in that morning. By noon my nerves were stretched thin. I checked my phone every few minutes, pretending I wasn't. Carol finally took it from my hand and set it face down. "He's survived worse," she said softly. I nodded, but the fear sat heavy in my chest. The woman kept working, sending files, answering calls, building momentum piece by piece. She explained that several outlets were coordinating quietly, waiting for confirmation they couldn't ignore. "Once one runs it big," she said, "the others will follow." In the early afternoon, the pressure turned personal. My sister called. We hadn't spoken much in years, not since Evan's funeral strained everything between us. She didn't waste time. "What's going on?" she asked. "There are people asking questions." I told her as little as possible. She lowered her voice. "Someone from the city came by," she said. "They wanted to know if you'd been acting strange." That word again. Strange. I thanked her and hung up, my hands trembling. Carol saw it and said, "They're poking everyone around us." The woman nodded. That's how they closed the circle. By late afternoon, Evan finally called. His voice was rushed. "They're close," he said. I asked where he was. "Moving," he replied. "Always moving." He told us there had been an attempt to detain him under an old warrant that shouldn't have existed anymore. "They're bending rules now," he said. The woman leaned toward the phone. "That means they're losing control," she said. Evan laughed once. "Good," he said. "Then it's working." Before hanging up, he said, "Dad, I need you ready." Ready for what was the question I didn't get to ask. An hour later, the answer came on its own. The woman's phone buzzed non-stop. She listened, nodded, then looked up at us. "One of the outlets is going public tonight," she said. "Names, faces, everything." Carol covered her mouth. I felt a strange mix of dread and relief. "What about Evan?" I asked. The woman hesitated. "Once it's out," she said, "they won't be able to quietly make him disappear." That wasn't the same as saying he'd be safe, but it was something. As evening fell, the first full story broke. It was bigger than I expected. Not just one case, but a pattern spanning years. A system that had quietly erased people who got in the way. I saw Evan's face for the first time in 2 decades. Blurred but unmistakable, labeled key witness. My chest tightened. Carol reached for my hand. "That's our boy," she said. My phone started ringing immediately. Unknown numbers, media requests, messages from people we hadn't heard from in years. The woman silenced them all. "Not yet," she repeated. Then the backlash came. A press conference. A familiar face at the podium. Detective Harris. He spoke calmly, confidently, dismissing the reports as misinformation. He expressed concern for a grieving father manipulated by bad actors. I felt my jaw clench. Carol muttered, "He's lying." The woman leaned back in her chair. "Good," she said. "Now he's on record." I didn't understand at first. Then she explained, "Everything he says now can be checked. Crossed. Used. Evan." Called again, this time calmer. "They're scrambling," he said. "I can feel it." He told us he'd seen the report. "I didn't think I'd ever see my face again," he admitted. I told him we were proud. He didn't respond right away. Then he said, "I just want this to end." I understood that more than he knew. Later that night there was a knock at the office door. Not loud, careful. The woman stiffened and motioned for silence. I felt my heart pound as she moved to the door and looked through the peephole. She relaxed slightly and opened it. A man stood there, older, wearing a suit that had seen better days. He introduced himself quietly, as an attorney representing someone who wanted to talk. "Off the record," he said. The woman didn't invite him in. "There is no off the record anymore," she replied. After he left, she turned to us. "That's new," she said. "They're offering negotiation." Carol asked if that was good. The woman smiled grimly. "It means they're scared." My phone buzzed one more time that night. A message from Evan. "If this works," he wrote, "I want breakfast at home." Tears blurred my vision. I typed back, "Anytime." As we shut everything down and prepared to move again, I realized something had shifted inside me. The fear was still there, but it no longer ruled me. For 20 years I'd lived quietly, afraid to question, afraid to hope. Now hope was the dangerous thing, and I was holding on to it anyway. Whatever tomorrow brought, we were past the point of turning back. The truth was out there now, and it was moving faster than any of us could stop it. Sleep came in short, shallow stretches that night, broken by the buzz of phones and the low murmur of the woman's voice as she coordinated what felt like 100 moving parts. By morning, exhaustion sat heavy in my bones, but adrenaline kept me upright. Carol noticed the tremor in my hands as I poured coffee and wrapped her fingers around the mug to steady it. "We're close," she said. It wasn't a question. It was something she needed to believe. I nodded. Even though close could mean anything now, the fallout from the story was spreading faster than I expected. More outlets picked it up. Commentators argued on television. Politicians issued statements that said a lot without saying anything at all. The woman watched it all with a careful eye. "They're trying to control the narrative," she said, "but they're reacting instead of leading. That's good." My phone rang again and again, but one call stood out, an unfamiliar number. "Local," I answered cautiously. A man introduced himself as a federal public defender. He said, "I represent someone who wants to cooperate." My heart skipped. I asked who. He paused. "Not over the phone," he said. "But it concerns your son," we told the woman, and for the first time she looked genuinely surprised. "That's faster than I expected," she said. "If they're flipping someone now, it means the pressure is real." Carol asked what that meant for Evan. The woman thought for a moment. "It could mean protection," she said. "Or it could mean they want to trade him." I didn't like either option, but at least it meant he was valuable. Valuable people are harder to erase. Evan called shortly after, as if he sensed the shift. His voice was quieter, more focused. "They're watching everything now," he said. "Phones, cameras, patterns." I told him about the defender. He exhaled slowly. "That might be it," he said. "Someone from the inside." He warned us not to trust anything until it was on paper. "They'll promise the world," he said, "then take it back when you blink." Carol leaned in and said, "We're not blinking." Evan laughed softly. "I know," he said. "That's why I called you first." By midday the woman arranged a meeting in a public place, crowded and impossible to control quietly. A courthouse cafeteria. The defender arrived alone, carrying a slim folder. He didn't sit down right away. He scanned the room, then nodded to himself, and took the chair across from us. "I won't waste your time," he said. "My client worked closely with the people you've been exposing. He has documentation. He wants immunity." The woman asked the obvious question. "In exchange for what?" The man met her gaze. "Testimony," he said. "And protection for your son." That word landed hard. Protection. I felt Carol's hand tighten around mine. "Where is Evan now?" the defender asked. I said I didn't know. He nodded as if that was the right answer. "Good," he said. "Then we're aligned." He slid the folder across the table. Inside were copies of emails, memos, signatures I recognized from Evan's files. It was real. The woman's jaw tightened. "This will blow it open," she said. The defender didn't smile. "It already has," he replied. When Evan called again, I told him everything. He listened without interrupting. "That's the man I told you about," he said finally, "the one who leaked my file." I asked if that made him trustworthy. Evan paused. "It makes him desperate," he said, "which is sometimes better." He asked me a question I hadn't expected. "Dad, are you ready to see me?" My heart jumped. "Yes," I said, immediately. He hesitated. "Not like you remember," he warned. I swallowed. I don't care, I said. I just want you home. The plan changed again that afternoon. Evan would turn himself in, not as a criminal, but as a protected witness. It was risky, but it shifted the rules. The woman explained it carefully. Once he's in federal custody, she said. They can't touch him without consequences. Carol asked about us. You'll be visible, the woman said. That's your protection now. I wasn't sure how I felt about that, but I understood the logic. Secrets had nearly destroyed us. Visibility might save us. As evening approached, Evan sent his location. Not far, closer than I'd imagined. My chest tightened with every mile as we drove to the meeting point, a secure building with too many cameras to count. The woman stayed behind. This is yours, she said. You've earned it. Carol and I were escorted inside by 2 agents who didn't say much. We waited in a small room that smelled faintly of disinfectant. My hands shook. Carol squeezed them. He's alive, she whispered. Remember that. The door opened, and for a moment I didn't recognize him. He was thinner, older in the face, his hair cut short and graying at the temples, but his eyes were the same. He stopped when he saw us, like he wasn't sure he was allowed to move closer. I stood up slowly. Evan, I said. He nodded. Hi, Dad. That was all it took. We crossed the room and held each other. Awkward at first, then tighter, like we were afraid letting go would undo everything. Carol cried openly, her hands on his face, memorizing him again. You're here, she kept saying. You're really here. Evan nodded, tears in his own eyes. I'm sorry, he said. Over and over. An agent cleared his throat gently, reminding us time was limited. Evan pulled back slightly and looked at me. This isn't over, he said. But it's different now. I nodded. We'll wait, I said. As long as it takes. When we left, the night air felt cooler, lighter somehow. Carol leaned against me, exhausted but smiling through tears. My phone buzzed with one last message from Evan, sent through official channels. Breakfast soon, it read. I smiled for the first time in days without forcing it. There were still dangers ahead, still questions unanswered. But for the first time in 20 years, my son wasn't a memory. He was a future. And whatever came next, we would face it together. The waiting was harder than I expected. Once Evan was officially in custody, everything slowed down in a way that felt unnatural after days of constant movement. We were told it was for his safety, that procedures had to be followed, that patience mattered now. Carol tried to keep busy, straightening drawers that were already organized, making meals neither of us touched. I found myself sitting by the window more than once, watching cars pass, half expecting one of them to stop for the wrong reason. But nothing happened. That silence felt different this time. Not threatening, careful. 2 days later the woman called. Her voice sounded lighter than before, like she'd finally allowed herself to breathe. It's working, she said. Subpoenas are going out, quietly, but they're real. She told us Detective Harris had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. No announcement yet, but it was coming. Carol closed her eyes and whispered, Thank God. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. I'd learned that hope had to be handled gently. Too much of it. Too fast. And it could hurt. We were allowed a brief call with Evan that evening. It wasn't private, but it didn't need to be. His voice sounded steadier than I'd heard it in weeks. They're treating me like I matter, he said. Like I'm not disposable. That sentence alone told me everything I needed to know about the last 20 years of his life. I asked how he was holding up. He said, tired, relieved, scared. Then he added, But I'm not alone anymore. Carol leaned close to the phone and said, Neither are we. As the days passed, the story grew, more names surfaced. Hearings were scheduled. The man Evan had testified against all those years ago was back in custody, this time without the quiet protections that had shielded him before. The woman checked in often, keeping us informed but grounded. Justice is slow, she reminded us. But it's moving. I believed her. For the first time in a long time, I believed someone who said that. A week later, we were allowed to see Evan again. This time without the rush. He looked stronger, even smiled when he saw us walk in. We sat across from him at a plain table. No barriers between us. "You look good," I said. He laughed. "You're lying," he replied. "But thanks." Carol reached across the table and held his hands. "You're home," she said. He shook his head gently. "Almost," he replied. "But close." We talked about small things at first. Food, music, the way the neighborhood had changed. Then Evan grew serious. "I need to tell you everything," he said. "Not the official version, the real one." He told us about the nights he'd slept in places he couldn't remember the names of, the birthdays he'd marked alone, the moments he'd almost reached out and stopped himself, because he couldn't risk bringing danger back to us. Carol cried quietly, not interrupting. When he finished, he looked at us and said, "I didn't survive this because I was strong. I survived because I kept thinking of coming back here." That was when I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to before. Evan hadn't disappeared to save himself. He'd disappeared to save us. The weight of that nearly crushed me. I said, "You shouldn't have had to." He nodded. "I know," he said. "That's why this ends now." He told us he'd agreed to testify fully. No more redactions. No more half-truths. "If they're going to drag this into the light," he said, "then everything goes with it." The testimony took weeks. We weren't allowed to attend, but we followed every development closely. Some days were harder than others. There were setbacks, delays, attempts to undermine Evan's credibility that didn't stick the way they once might have. Each time doubt crept in. Carol reminded me where we'd started. "We buried our son," she said. "And now he's fighting back." That perspective mattered. When the indictments finally came down, they felt almost anticlimactic. A list of names, charges, dates. But behind every line was a choice, a life affected, a silence enforced. Evan called that night. His voice was calm. "It's done," he said. "The hard part is done." I asked, "What came next?" He paused. "Now I figure out who I am when I don't have to hide," he said. Carol smiled through tears. "You'll figure it out at home," she said. He laughed. "I'd like that." The day Evan walked out of federal protection and into our driveway didn't feel dramatic. No cameras, no speeches, just a car pulling up, and my son stepping out, duffel bag over his shoulder. He stood there for a second, like he wasn't sure if the ground beneath him was real. I walked toward him slowly, afraid of rushing this moment. He said, "Hey, Dad," I said. "Hey, son." That was enough. We hugged, and this time there was no clock ticking. That evening we sat at the same kitchen table where this all began. Carol cooked too much food, like she always did when she was nervous. Evan ate quietly, looking around, taking it all in. "I used to imagine this," he admitted. "But I never let myself believe it," I told him. "Neither did we," he nodded. "I know," he nodded. "I know." After dinner, he pulled something from his bag and set it on the table, Grandpa's watch. "I think this belongs here," he said. I closed my hand around it and felt something finally settle. Later that night, after Evan went to bed in his old room, Carol and I sat in the living room, the house quiet in a way that felt earned. She leaned her head on my shoulder and said, "We got him back." I nodded. We did. I thought about the phone call that started everything, about the whisper at 2 a.m., about the fear and the doubt, and the choices that followed. If I'd ignored that call, if I'd chosen comfort over truth, none of this would have happened. I don't know what the future holds. Evan has a long road ahead, and so do we. Some wounds don't disappear just because justice catches up. But I know this. When my phone rings in the middle of the night now, I don't dread it the way I used to. Because sometimes the call you're afraid to answer is the one that brings your life back.